Close your eyes and imagine the exact moment when the sky opened, not to reveal glory, but to reveal war. What John saw was not a poetic metaphor, nor a delirious dream. It was a sign in the sky, a sign for those who can still discern when God speaks without a voice and the Spirit cries without sound. And there was a woman, clothed with the sun, with the moon under her feet, and a crown of 12 stars on her head. It was not a common vision, it was a prophetic calling. And if this woman were the mirror of your forgotten soul, and if, by understanding what she represents, you found the key to a spiritual identity that the world has tried to steal, perhaps you have walked feeling invisible to heaven. Perhaps you think your faith no longer has a place amid so much noise. But listen, there is a woman in the scriptures who carries not just a child, but a mystery. The woman of Revelation 12 is not just Israel, nor just Mary, nor a distant allegory of the church. She is all of this and much more. She is the representation of the faithful people, of those who were persecuted, humiliated, but still generated life in the midst of the desert. She is the image of promise, of faithfulness, of sacred resistance. And what if this woman is the portrait of what God is trying to generate within you, even amid the pains? John sees a celestial woman, but most of us live with our eyes fixed on the mud of guilt, doubt, broken religiosity. We live as children without a mother, faith without root, light without origin. That is why spiritual identity is lost, because we forget where we came from. But today, perhaps, the Spirit brought you here to remember. You were not created to wander in darkness. You belong to something bigger, older, more eternal. The woman clothed with the sun is the reminder that, even in the densest darkness, there is an origin of glory pulsing in those who choose to remain faithful. This chapter of Revelation is not just eschatological, it is intimate. It speaks of cosmic wars, but also of inner battles, and the greatest of them may be this: remembering who you are when everything around tries to erase your origin. Therefore, this message is not a prophetic curiosity. It is a call. It is as if God were saying, return to the place from where your soul came. Return to the woman. Return to the promise. Because only those who recognize where they came from understand where they are going. Now take a deep breath. Something inside you has already begun to move. The woman is in labor pains, and what she will generate, the dragon will try to destroy. But first, we need to understand who this woman is and what she carries, because the next revelation may be about you. Perhaps what you are about to hear now is the answer your soul has been silently waiting for. Because among the most mysterious symbols of Revelation, there is a woman who shines with the sun, steps on the moon, and is crowned with 12 stars. But who is she? Israel, Mary, or the church? The question is not just theological, it is existential. Because this woman does not just represent a people, she represents a calling, an origin, a destiny. And many live as if they did not know to whom they spiritually belong, as if they were wandering in a land that does not recognize their heritage. It is an ancient wound, the stolen identity of God's people. Since Eden, the serpent has tried to rewrite our history, erase our roots, confuse our spiritual origin. And when this happens, faith becomes ritual, prayer becomes noise, and the soul becomes orphaned. But the woman of Revelation is not in ruins. She is clothed with the sun. There is light upon her. There is purpose in her pain. And there is a promise being generated in her spiritual womb. The sun, the moon, and the stars are more than cosmic symbols. They point to an invisible reality, a spiritual authority that the world does not recognize, but heaven observes with reverence. The woman is surrounded by celestial bodies, between lights and shadows, between kingdoms and battles, between time and eternity. She carries within herself the reflection of the church that should shine, but often hides. The reflection of a faith that should guide, but has been guided. She denounces the forgotten place that God's people should occupy, not as a supporting role in the world, but as a prophetic sign of the kingdom. But there is a hidden warning in this vision. Not every woman who speaks in God's name is true. There are imitations, bodies that call themselves church, but do not carry the sun. Voices that preach light, but are a reflection of the disguised dragon. Religions that imitate the body of Christ but deny his essence. They are forms without substance, altars without sacrifice, preaching without the cross. And this is where many are lost, following the appearance of the woman but not the fruit she bears. If the woman represents Israel, she is the living memory of the covenant. If she represents Mary, she is the honor given to obedience. If she represents the church, she is the reflection of those who were persecuted but not abandoned. But perhaps more than all this, she is a mirror, a call for you to remember that your faith has origin, that your struggle has meaning, that your spiritual history did not begin with pain. It began with a promise. And if today you feel that you have lost your spiritual identity, that your faith is fragmented, that your soul finds no shelter, remember the woman. Remember that even in labor pains she did not lose her crown. Even before the dragon she did not lose her light. Perhaps God is trying to generate something new in you, something the enemy fears, something heaven awaits. Because what this woman carries is not just a son. It is the beginning of a war, and it is also the promise of a victory. There are pains that are not just pains. They are spiritual gestations. There are tears that do not just fall. They announce invisible births. The woman of Revelation, clothed with the sun, is in labor. But what she is generating is not just a son. It is a promise, a government, a kingdom. And she gave birth to a son, a male child, who is to rule all the nations with a rod of iron. This man-child is more than a prophetic baby. He is the seed of the throne, the echo of a royalty born amid persecution, pointing to an eternal destiny. The Son is, above all, the Christ, the Messiah who conquered death, who was resurrected, who ascended and who will return in glory. But in the sacred text, he is also the fruit of a woman in pain, the birth of something the dragon tries to devour before it even breathes. And this carries a profound revelation. Every true promise will be persecuted before it is fulfilled. Every genuine obedience will be attacked before it flourishes. And every fidelity will be tested before it is crowned. Psalm 2 echoes in Revelation like an ancient sound that still resonates. You are my son. Today I have become your father. Ask me, and I will make the nations your inheritance. This declaration is not just historical, it is eternal, because the Son who is born of the woman is the same who reigns over the heavens, but he is also the Christ being formed within each believer who chooses to remain faithful even in the face of threat. It is not just about a birth in Bethlehem, it is about births that still happen, every time someone chooses not to negotiate their faith. And here is the subtle spiritual danger, reducing the Son to an event of the past. Many see only the historical Jesus, the baby in the manger, the preacher of the mountains, but they forget that he is also the glorified Christ who reigns now and who desires to be spiritually born in every heart that surrenders. The man-child is also a reflection of those who were born again, not of the flesh but of the Spirit, those who do not bow to the world, who do not negotiate faith, who were generated in tears, but live as heirs of the kingdom. And if today there is something being generated within you, do not be surprised by the pain, because every pain that generates Christ is worth more than 1,000 pleasures that generate vanity. The dragon knows what is at stake. That is why he waits before the woman, ready to devour the Son, because he knows that when Christ is born, his defeat approaches. But there is a throne prepared from the beginning, and nothing that was generated in God can be prevented from ascending to that throne. This is the hope of those who weep today, to know that there is a Son being formed within them, a Christ being generated not in religious buildings, but in willing hearts. And everyone who allows this spiritual birth participates in the government of the Lamb, because the woman gave birth to the Son, but the Son will rule the nations. There is a creature lurking in the sacred text. It does not emerge with subtlety, nor does it hide in the shadows. It appears with violence and profane glory, embodying a hatred that is not human but millennial. John saw it, and it was red, a dragon, 7 heads, 10 horns, and on its heads 7 crowns. It was not just a monster, it was a system, an empire, a throne of darkness sustained by centuries of deception, and perhaps the most frightening is that it seemed to have authority. The red color screams blood, wrath, profanation. The dragon is the archetype of the serpent of Eden, but now in the form of spiritual government. It does not come just to attack, it comes to seduce, corrupt, offer power in exchange for worship. What began as a whisper in the garden becomes a roar in the sky. It does not just deceive, it offers crowns. And how many accept? How many exchange the promise for prestige? How many bow before a glory that devours from within? The 7 heads are not just a symbolic number, They represent perfection, but a perfection of deception, a complete structure of dominion, political, economic, religious, cultural. The dragon is the sum of all the forces that rise against the government of Christ. It does not appear in grotesque forms. Often it manifests in refined speeches, in sophisticated altars, in platforms that quote God, but deny the Spirit. The dragon presents itself as an answer, but is poisoned in its essence. And spiritual vigilance is necessary, because the dragon speaks like a lamb but devours like a beast. It quotes verses, but distorts the word. It preaches morality, but hides the cross. It builds cathedrals, but never generates repentance. It promotes leaders, but rejects prophets. And it is in this disguise that many are lost, because what seems spiritual does not always come from the Spirit. There are gospels that were fabricated in hell. There are churches that function as arms of the dragon, because they lost the Son, but maintained the appearance of the woman. The conflict is not just symbolic, it is cosmic, and it is ongoing. The dragon rose against the woman, because it knows what she carries. It knows that if the Son is born, it will lose. Therefore it tries to prevent the birth, corrupt the origin, stain the promise. And that is what it does to this day, trying to paralyze those who are about to generate something eternal. It accuses, distracts, seduces, confuses. But the dragon has already been exposed. It can roar, but it cannot overcome the light that carries the sun. If you feel that you are at war, that there is an invisible fury against your life, perhaps it is because something in you still resists the dragon's domain, and this bothers it, because what it cannot control, it tries to destroy. But remember, whoever is born of the Spirit does not bow to the empire of the serpent, because greater is he who dwells in you than he who rises against you. Not every war is heard with the ears. Some are only perceived when the soul begins to tremble from within, as if an invisible battlefield has been installed in the spirit. John did not just see a woman, a son, and a dragon. He saw heaven at war, a battle that was not waged between human nations, but between eternal powers. And in this conflict, Michael emerges, the archangel of justice, the defender of those who belong to God. Not as a mythological figure, but as a sign that the Most High does not remain silent in the face of oppression. Michael and his angels fought, the dragon too, and heaven ceased to be just a refuge. It became a battlefield. This battle is more real than many want to believe, because what happens in the invisible determines what manifests in the visible. When there is war in heaven, there are consequences on earth. When angels fight, souls tremble. When the dragon is cast out, the kingdoms of this world begin to shake. Revelation does not just speak of a distant future, it reveals the backstage of the present. And if you feel that everything is falling apart around you, perhaps it is because what is happening above is touching you below. Michael appears as the warrior of light, but also as the guardian of the people. He does not just attack, he protects. He represents God's response to the threat of the dragon, the justice that intervenes when the faithful are in danger. And this carries a restorative truth. You are not alone. There is a heaven in motion when the children are threatened. There are angels on alert when hell is agitated. And there is a spiritual order being executed even when everything seems silent. But this war is not won with human weapons. It requires spiritual alignment. Michael fights, but does not fight for everyone. He fights for those who position themselves with fidelity, for those who do not betray the covenant, for those who keep the word even when it hurts. Therefore, to fight with Michael is more than to pray with force. It is to live with integrity. It is to fast, not to conquer, but to purify. It is to watch, not to be afraid, but to remain awake. The war of heaven requires warriors of the earth who do not surrender to the patterns of the world. And the dragon was cast down. It lost its place. It was defeated, but its fury did not cease. It fell with wrath, knowing that it has little time left. And here the battle changes scene. Heaven was cleansed, but earth became the target. And that is why many feel the weight of oppression, the advance of darkness, the invisible pressure on the soul. Because what was expelled from above now tries to destroy what is below. But those who belong to God need not fear, because Michael has already fought and won. Heaven is open. The path has been cleared, and victory is accessible to all who decide to stand firm, even when the world collapses. This war still echoes, but it will not be eternal, and those who fight with Michael will end with the Lamb, because where there is fidelity, there is divine intervention. Where there is surrender, there is invisible victory. And where there is battle, there is a heaven in motion. There are places that, to human eyes, seem like abandonment, but to God's eyes, they are shelter. The woman of Revelation, after generating the son and facing the fury of the dragon, flees to the desert. And for many, this sounds like defeat, like exile, like punishment. But the sacred text reveals a detail that changes everything. The desert was prepared by God. It was not chance that led her there. It was not the enemy who expelled her. It was heaven itself that led her to this place of solitude, silence, and survival. How many today feel exactly like this? Spiritually exiled, as if God had set them aside in a corner of existence, forgotten and isolated. But there is a secret hidden in the desert. It is not punishment. It is protection. It is in the desert that God hides his most precious children. Not because he rejected them, but because he wants to preserve them. The desert is God's hiding place. It was there that Moses went before the calling. It was there that Elijah heard the gentle breeze. It was in the desert that Jesus defeated the enemy. And it is there that the woman is sustained for 12 and 60 days. This number is not random. It reveals something profound. Even pain has a limit. Even exile has a date to end. God does not just allow the desert, he controls the time within it. Not a tear escapes his chronometer, not a cry is lost in the vastness. The desert has a beginning, middle, and end, but whoever crosses it with faith comes out transformed. Because the silence of the desert teaches more than 1,000 sermons. It tears the ego, purifies the heart, and makes the soul hear what it would never hear in the crowd. But there is something that few understand. Accepting the desert is a sign of spiritual maturity. Many murmur, many give up, many run away. But those who remain, even without understanding, discover that the desert is not empty. It is sacred. It is the place where heaven descends without making noise. Where the presence of God is revealed in subtle forms. Where the soul learns that the value of faith is not in the answer, but in permanence. And where one learns to trust even without seeing, to continue even without feeling, to worship even amid the dust. And perhaps you are living your own desert now. Silence, absence, emptiness. But what if this is not abandonment? What if it is protection? What if what you feel as distance is in fact the invisible hand of God hiding you from the dragon? The woman went to the desert not to die, but to be sustained. And she was sustained. Because when God takes us to the desert, he also gives us manna. He sends ravens. He makes water spring from the rock. The desert does not kill the chosen ones, it prepares them. What seems like exile may be the school of the prophets. What seems like abandonment may be the incubator of the promise. What seems like an end but may be the beginning of something that only heaven knows. The desert is hard, yes, but it is in the desert that God reveals himself to those who have ears to hear the silence. And it is there that he transforms fugitives into messengers, the tired into warriors, and the afflicted into bearers of glory. Because the desert is more than a place, it is a process, and whoever passes through it with fidelity comes out carrying something that the world can never take away. There is a moment when the fury of the enemy is no longer disguised. It reveals itself, it intensifies, it launches itself against everything that still resists its dominion. And John sees this moment clearly. The dragon, knowing that it has little time, is filled with wrath. It does not attack the indifferent. It does not persecute those who have already surrendered. It turns its fury against the woman and against the rest of her offspring, against those who keep the commandments of God and have the testimony of Jesus, not the religious, but the faithful. This distinction is crucial. The dragon does not care about appearance. It rages against essence. It does not fear titles or traditions. It hates obedience. And that is why those who keep the commandments, those who remain firm even when no one sees, become preferential targets of hell. Because these are the ones who sustain the light. They are the ones who preserve the testimony. They are the ones who still believe, even when the whole world mocks faith. This persecution is not always explicit. Sometimes it comes in the form of weariness, in mental attacks, in invisible pressures. Other times it manifests in family ruptures, in spiritual crises, in silent battles that no one else understands. But all have the same origin. The dragon knows it is losing. It knows that time is running out. It feels the prophetic clock accelerating, and the more the light advances, the more it roars. But this fury, as frightening as it may seem, is also a sign of something glorious. It confirms that the heavens are in motion, that the promise is alive, that the kingdom is approaching, because the dragon does not waste its wrath on what is dead. It only attacks what carries life. And if you have felt this war on your soul, perhaps it is because there is something in you that hell recognizes and fears. Faced with this reality, there is no room for spiritual neutrality. It is time for discernment, for vigilance, for alliance with the saints. The world tries to distract, the serpent tries to seduce, but the Holy Spirit still guides those who want to resist. And this resistance is not born of human strength, but of intimacy with heaven. The faithful do not resist because they are strong. They resist because they are sustained. Spiritual discernment is seeing beyond the visible. It is perceiving when a word carries poison, when a decision smells like a trap. Daily vigilance is not letting down your guard even when everything seems calm, because the enemy is astute. It waits for the moment of vulnerability, and the alliance with the saints is the reminder that no one wins this battle alone. There is power in the communion of the righteous. There is strength when 2 or 3 unite in the name of the Lamb. The fury of the dragon is real, but the faithfulness of God is eternal. And everyone who perseveres to the end, even under attack, carries within themselves the mark of those who have already overcome. Because the war may intensify, but the victory has already been decreed from above, and no roar can annul the blood that has already been shed. The final battle will not be won by force, but by faithfulness. And that is what the dragon fears most. Faithful ones who do not negotiate their essence, even when everything around collapses. The spiritual warfare described in Revelation 12 is not a distant fable. It breathes in silent routines, in thoughts that no one sees, in internal conflicts that happen between a suffocated prayer and a silence that seems never to end. The dragon does not manifest itself only in great prophetic events. It whispers in the details. It attacks in distraction. It roars when the soul wavers, and that is why defeating it requires more than knowledge. It requires spiritual discipline, faithful testimony, and constant vigilance. Spiritual discipline is like an invisible trench. Many despise it, thinking it is just religiosity or empty routine. But in the spiritual world, constancy is resistance. Prayer in the early mornings, regular fasting, reading the word in spirit, these are not tasks to please God, but shields that rise in the invisible. Each morning when the body rises, even tired, is a sentinel placed before the soul. Each fast is a cut in the ego that weakens the dominion of the flesh. Each biblical reading done with spiritual hunger is a sharp sword against the darts of deception. Faithful testimony is more powerful than 1,000 speeches. And they overcame him by the blood of the Lamb and by the word of their testimony. This does not refer only to what is spoken publicly, but to what is lived when no one is watching. The testimony that wounds the dragon is the one that resists temptation in secret, that chooses forgiveness when there would be reason for revenge, that maintains integrity even when it could become corrupted. It is incarnated life, faith that breathes, truth that bleeds but does not deny the cross. There is also a poorly guarded territory, one's own mouth, and it is in this place that many defeats begin. The serpent takes advantage of loose words, of murmurings disguised as venting, of gossip wrapped in concern. Each word that comes out without discernment can open breaches for accusation. The tongue is small but can set an entire forest on fire, and the dragon feeds on this fire. Therefore there is power in silencing when the soul is at war, in speaking only what edifies, in transforming the mouth into an altar, not a pit. These simple, almost invisible practices are the most effective trenches of spiritual battle, and often hell roars, but retreats before a bent knee, a broken heart, a mind renewed by the word. The dragon wants spectacle, but is defeated by hidden acts of fidelity. It seeks great errors, but stumbles on small sanctities. It roars in chaos, but is conquered in the quiet room where someone still believes, still prays, still hopes. Victory over the dragon begins in daily choices, in habits that seem simple but carry glory, in the heart that, even wounded, decides not to sell out, in the soul that, even tired, still repeats, "I believe," because the kingdom is not made only of grandiose revelations, but of persistent faithfulness, and the one who perseveres not only resists the dragon, they overcome it by the blood, by the word, by the life that chooses to remain. even when everything around says to give up. And what if everything you have heard so far is not just a prophetic revelation about the heavens, but a spiritual mirror of your own journey? The woman in pain, the son who is born, the dragon that roars, the flight to the desert, the war in the heights. All this echoes not only in the history of redemption, but in the heart of every soul that dares to remain faithful amid chaos. Because Revelation was not written just to inform, it was written to awaken. To remind that the battle you feel is not madness, it is reality, and that the suffering you face may be the forerunner of a spiritual birth that hell tries to prevent. The woman was not destroyed, the son was not devoured, the dragon was cast out, the promise was preserved. And all this points to a truth that needs to be engraved in the soul. Victory has already been decreed. The cross was not just a moment of pain, it was the beginning of judgment against the empire of darkness. The blood of the Lamb did not just forgive sins, it disarmed principalities. The testimony of the saints is not just memory, it is a sword that continues to wound the enemy. The throne of the Son is not waiting, it has already been established. But even with victory sealed, the combat continues. Not because God still needs to win, but because he chose to generate this victory in us. The Christ who ascended also desires to be born in every heart that surrenders. And this spiritual generation requires surrender, perseverance, alliance, because the woman only gave birth after intense pains, because the desert only became a refuge after persecution, because Michael only appeared when the war reached the heavens. Nothing is by chance. Nothing is without purpose. Nothing is outside the divine plan. And if today you feel part of this invisible plot, perhaps it is because heaven is writing through your life. Each tear has been counted. Each silence has been interpreted. Each prayer, even without words, has risen like incense. And the God who saw the woman, the son, the dragon, and the war also sees you. He knows your fears, your falls, your doubts. But he also knows what is about to be born within you, and what is about to be born when the dragon cannot prevent. Time is running out, not to frighten you, but to awaken you, because the fury of the enemy is the sign that the light is advancing. And if you still feel the call, still hear the word, still desire the kingdom, it is because there is still covenant, there is still chance, there is still a place for you in the history of redemption. The woman clothed with the sun is not a distant vision. She can be the image of your faith being restored. The man-child can be the Christ being formed in you, and the desert can be the womb where God hides you to generate something that the world has not yet seen. Close your eyes, breathe with the Spirit, and listen. Heaven is speaking. The Son has won, the dragon has fallen, and you are still part of this story, until the end, until the kingdom, until the throne. Because those who overcame were not the strongest. They were the ones who did not give up, even in silence, even with fear, even with pain. They remained, and this permanence sealed eternity.